Hello YouTube, my name is Emily. I'm coming to you today with my very belated December wrap-up. I never like to film wrap-ups before the end of the month because sometimes I end up reading another book in that time. And the beginning of this month was completely insane. I was trying to get very important applications in and I was traveling and doing all kinds of things. So I never got around to actually filming my December wrap-up. And because this is so late, I'm also going to include books that I'm currently reading. I didn't have as good of a reading month in December as I did in November. The holidays tended to sort of get in the way of me being able to read. So as opposed to the 13 books I read in November, I read 8 books in December. Still nothing to laugh at, but still below my personal goals. So let's get right to it. Let's talk about the books I read in December. The first book I read in December was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. You might know Madeline Miller as the writer of Circe, which was a big hit last year. This followed the story of Achilles and his friend slash gay lover Patroclus. The main POV character is Patroclus, and it follows him as he meets Achilles when he's being fostered, and later on when they're both being apprenticed by Charon, the centaur, and of course during the Trojan War. I did have a substantial classics background when I was in high school. I took Latin for 5 years and I did read the Odyssey in its entirety, and I read large sections of the Iliad, so I was very familiar with a lot of the characters and the story of the Trojan War. So it was really interesting to see how Madeline Miller chose to revisit and reinterpret some of these characters. And of course, Madeline Miller is a teacher of classics, so of course I was interested in her perspective. But yes, it's a very beautifully written book. Achilles and Patroclus go through a lot of the pains and passions of a long-term relationship. Neither of them is perfect, and you can see both characters have a lot of flaws. But you can also see how Patroclus complements Achilles really well. Overall, just a really beautiful interpretation of a not so spoken about relationship. So Madeline Miller's interpretations of other characters were also kind of interesting to me. Like Odysseus is portrayed as an actual tactical genius, and he is not bombastic the way he is in the Odyssey. He knows how to play politics really well. He knows how to play with people's minds. I actually read this book for a book club that was hosted by Sana from Books and Quills, who is one of my favorite booktubers. And we ended up talking about how this book does a very interesting twist on the Achilles heel. I'm not gonna spoil it, but for those of you who did read this book, what did you think of it? Overall, I gave this book 4 stars on Goodreads. It didn't blow me away. I didn't think it was a perfect book, but overall, I felt it was a well-written, well-developed love story. The next book I finished was Sheets by Brenna Thumler. This is a graphic novel about a girl who is left to fend for herself running her family's laundromat after her mother has died. There's a rich guy in town who's trying to buy the plot of land that her laundromat is on and build a spa there instead. But then one day, a ghost of a boy comes to town and starts haunting her laundromat. And of course, when he starts haunting the laundromat, some shenanigans ensue. This was just a very cute, wholesome read, but it was also very bittersweet because it managed to deal with some very sad themes. There's a lot of dealing with grief and processing it, and also just dealing with being dead. But if you're looking for a short and sweet and wholesome read, I highly recommend Sheets by Brenna Thumler. The next book I read was It Devours by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner. This, of course, is a spin-off novel from the Night Vale podcast. This book follows a lot of the current season's events in the podcast. It follows a lot of the activities of the Church of the Smiling God. Basically, there is a being going around Night Vale and swallowing things up into the ground. So one of the main characters is a scientist, and the other main character is a member of the Church of the Smiling God. So basically, the two bring their religion and scientific thinking together to solve this mystery. I found this book much more coherent than the last Night Vale novel. It definitely hung together very tight. There was a clear beginning, middle, and end. There was not much meandering. That was actually one of my big complaints about the last Night Vale novel. But I will say that I did miss some aspects of that meandering of that first book. In the first book, there would be excerpts from the radio show, and then there was a lot of weird monologuing about the weirdness of the town. And while I felt there was too much of that in the first book, I wanted there to be more of that in this book. So I gave this about 4 stars. I thought it was a solid novel, and I found found it highly entertaining. Cecil Baldwin's narration is always amazing, but I wanted a little more weirdness into it, and which is why I didn't raise the rating higher. The next book I read was Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is about a girl called Agnieszka who is taken as tribute to the castle of this wizard called the Dragon. Her entire village is beholden to this wizard, so every 10 years or so they have to give him one of their girls. And he picks Agnieszka because she has some magical abilities. And this is based on Eastern European folklore, so there are a lot of allusions to different Eastern European countries. This was a solid read. I will say that it was quite slow in the beginning. It took about 120 pages for it to really pick up. So basically the main threat of the story is this forest that is just snatching villagers and possessing them. Essentially it integrates them into the life of this forest. And I love this idea of this Lovecraftian forest that could just infiltrate humans and entire villages. And of course I love the incorporation of Slavic tales and folklore into the story. But now, as much as I enjoyed the story overall, I did take issues with certain characters. Lots of people on Goodreads have already said this, but Agnieszka is kind of a special snowflake. She's kind of like that Bella Swan character that's always tripping on things. Her hair is always dirty. She's always spilling things on herself. Her clothes get dirty whenever she just goes outside. This didn't necessarily keep me from rooting for her, but I just found it annoying at times. And also the dragon, who is perpetually mean. Like, even when he's in love, he cannot stop being so mean. So that aspect of his character kind of took me out of his and Agnieszka's love story a little bit. Like, even when he acts very loving towards her, it feels so abrupt and out of character. Like, I don't know, maybe he just has a different love language. So those were my character issues. The magic system was okay. It seems very based on certain words and how you say them, which, sure, I guess that's kind of like how the Harry Potter magic system works. Overall, it just wasn't the best magic system I'd ever seen, but of course it made for some amazing visuals at times in the story. And there is a group of people who are part of the answer to what's going on with the forest at the end, and I wish they had been set up a bit more throughout the story, because I just found myself having to reread some passages to actually understand a lot of the exposition that was laid down on us at the end. And I wouldn't have had to go back and reread passages if I'd just been clued in from the beginning. So not a perfect read, but still one that I enjoyed. I gave this 3.75 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Next up, I read Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is a fantasy based off West African folklore. So this takes place in the, I guess, fictional nation of Orisha. In this country, magic has been outlawed. Magic users are usually killed or outcast from society, but also magic has died and no one is really sure why. So the main character, Zaylee, is a diviner, so she has the potential to be a magic user, and she's marked by having white hair. So a lot of times she is oppressed by government authorities. But one day, a disaster prompts her to go on a quest to reactivate magic. This book had a really cool magic system. The magic is very much connected to the deities of this people. And also there's a really subtle and nuanced narrative about oppression and self-hatred. I really did enjoy reading Zaylee's story. She does have a romance in the course of the story, which I wasn't really sold on. I won't spoil too much about his character in case you haven't read it. I liked the character of her love interest, but I just simply wasn't sold on them getting together at this juncture in their story. I also listened to this on audiobook and it was a great experience. The narrator does the voices really well and also the incantations. Overall, this is a really engaging fantasy. I gave it 4.25 stars on Goodreads. And next up, of course, I had to read Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. This is the third novel in her Folk of the Air trilogy. I have been enjoying this series immensely. Every other book in that series I have been powering through in less than 2 days. The political intrigue in that series is amazing. So I bought a copy of Queen of Nothing at Waterstones because it was inevitable that I was going to have it. And of course I was dying to know the conclusion to this story because the Wicked King left us high and dry. So I read it while I was in the States for the holidays. A lot of people online have been saying this is not the strongest book in the series, and I do have to agree. The other books were just a whirlwind of political intrigue and thing after thing happening. And this didn't really offer the type of intrigue that was in the last two books. I would say its function was more to tie up everybody's arcs rather than to give us a whole other saga of political intrigue. So this wasn't a perfect ending to this series, but I would say it did the job. I would have loved for there to be more Jude and Cardan because they were just a couple that I could really get behind, especially in the last book. And now I'm just kind of sad that I finished this series because this has been one of my favorite series in the last couple of years. I really just want more of this world. I really love the fairy world that Holly Black has created. I absolutely love how she writes fairies. They're just so weird and ethereal, and they just have their own culture and mindset. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I gave the two other books 5 stars because they were perfect and entertained me thoroughly. This didn't quite stick the landing for me, but I still enjoyed it a lot. And I'm looking forward to digging into other books in Holly Black's repertoire to experience more stories in this world. Next up is a book that's more in the comic book genre. That is Justice League Dark, Volume 1. This is the first volume in the New 52 series. Justice League Dark is made up of characters like John Constantine, Zatanna, Madame Xanadu, Boston Brand off the top of my head. So I like characters like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman well enough, but I've always been really drawn to the more magical aspects of this comic book universe. I did start reading Hellblazer last year and of course really wanted to read more John Constantine. And sometimes apparently Swamp Thing appears in Justice League Dark, so of course I had to pick up some Justice League Dark. So I researched Justice League Dark publications on Wikipedia, and apparently this was the series to start with. This volume was called In the Dark, and basically there's a witch called the Enchantress who is going insane and wreaking havoc in the minds of people all over Gotham. So much so that she is overwhelming the powers of Superman and Wonder Woman. So of course they have to call on a team of more magically inclined people, which is where Justice League Dark comes in. This was a really nice introduction to a lot of the characters. I think it helped for me that I had watched the Justice League Dark animated film, which my boyfriend showed me. So I was already a little bit acquainted with many of these characters. And the comic book universe is this big, interconnected, intricate thing. Sometimes you'll open a comic book and if you don't have enough context from other comic books, you won't get it. So I don't know if I was helped along by watching the animated film or reading a bit of Hellblazer beforehand, but I didn't have that much trouble getting acquainted with everybody and following the storyline. And overall, this was a pretty solid read. The magic was as trippy as I liked it. I found the action scenes really engaging. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So the last book I read in December and in 2019 was Metabarons Volume 4, Oda. This is of course the 4th volume in the Metabarons series by Alejandro Jodorowsky. So the Metabarons is a series about a family of space mercenaries, and in each generation a son has to kill his father in order to carry on the family line and traditions. So this story I guess covers how this family actually came to be mercenaries, but it gets all kinds of weird. There's a little bit of incest in this volume, and as always in a Jodorowsky book there is gore. But yeah, this volume is all kinds of weird, but I still do highly recommend this series if you like stories like Dune, stories that really aren't afraid to really go there. So yeah, I enjoyed this volume. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. It was fun and weird and I plan on continuing. So that's it for books that I read in December. That basically rounded out my entire reading year. And now onto a brief section on books I'm currently reading. Right now I'm reading Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. It's basically an alternative Regency England with wizards, and the two main characters are 2 wizards called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and they both have some rivaling opinions on the potential of magic for England. I started this book in December and was really hoping to finish it before the year was out. Unfortunately, I felt that I had started it too late in the month and I really didn't want to rush this book, so I decided to take it slow, let the story breathe. So far I'm really enjoying it. I'm liking the audiobook. I also like reading it on Kindle. I do really enjoy it, but it's just one of those reads that you should not rush through. It's really worthwhile to take in the language and the banter and all the elegant writing. So I'm making my way through that one. Another book that I began in 2019 but did not get around to finishing is The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh. Honestly, I'm probably going to DNF this book. I'm just finding it highly dull. This was marketed marketed as a vampire story in 1870s New Orleans. I'm about 130 pages in and there are no vampires yet. The main character, Celine, is a seamstress who's on the run from Paris, and her internal dialogue is so tiresome. She keeps thinking about how she has this dark secret and how she's a sinner, while not informing us at all about what her dark secret is or why she thinks she's such a bad sinner. But yeah, I'm probably DNFing this because I'm not engaged. Every time I think about reading this, my soul dies a little bit. I really did try, but I don't think I can do it. And the last book that I'm currently reading is Justice League Dark Volume 2, The Books of Magic. So I read the first volume last month, and I wanted something kind of easy to get me out of the funk that The Beautiful has been putting me in. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I've been going through a bit of a reading slump this month. I've just not really stuck with anything that I've picked up, so I'm hoping an action-filled graphic novel is going to be my thing. And so far, I'm enjoying it. There's vampires. I do love spending time with my favorite characters like John Constantine. So that's it for my December wrap-up and my currently reading. I hope you're having a great January. You can follow me on Twitter and Goodreads and Instagram. Subscribe to my channel if you like my content, and I will see you in my next video.